Why am I still alive? That question drilled into my skull over and over again, echoing through the smell of burning flesh, the screech of twisted metal, and the lifeless bodies scattered around me. I opened my eyes. I had no idea where I was. I tried to breathe, but the air was thick, choking a mix of fuel and charred skin that made my lungs feel like they were about to burst. In front of me was a body, the face unrecognizable, the eyes wide open as if still in disbelief that life had left. I couldn't look for long. Every time my gaze landed on another human form, it felt like something was crushing my heart. I kept asking myself, is this real? There were no screams at that moment, no cries for help, no words, just the deafening replay of an explosion ringing in my ears like a film reel jammed and frozen. Everything was still. Everything was silent. It was just me and fear. I looked at my hands. Blood. I wasn't dead. I could still feel my body trembling. But if this was what it meant to be alive, why did it feel like hell had just opened up? I started dragging myself out of that wreckage inch by inch. Shards of debris, seat belts, the soft crackling of electrical sparks. Every movement felt like I was stepping on what used to be someone. I heard a voice calling out in the distance. Then silence again. I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind clinging to the last echoes of a shattered world. I didn't yet understand what had happened, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a dream. This was a piece of my life I never imagined I'd survive to tell. I picked up a name tag lying at my feet. It wasn't mine. I didn't know the person it belonged to, but I knew they wouldn't get another chance. And I still couldn't stop asking, why me? If you've ever wondered whether there's truly a line between life and death, what comes next will show you it's thinner than a heartbeat, and sometimes that one heartbeat is the only thing that stands between you and forever.
Ajay and I had been apart for years. He lived in India, I lived in London. Life had pulled us in different directions, like two rivers that once ran side by side, but then split, not knowing if they'd ever meet again. But this time, I decided to come back. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, simply to see family, to visit my mother, to return to the land of my father, to Diu, the place where he was born and never returned to after leaving at 17. This trip wasn't planned long in advance. It was a sudden decision. I remember clearly that morning, after dreaming of my father standing in a windswept field on the coast of Gujarat, I messaged Ajay. "Ticket booked. Meet me in Ahmedabad. Let's go to Diu?" He replied with just 3 words, "I've been waiting." And I knew he wasn't just answering a travel plan. He was answering a fracture left long unspoken. From all the meaningless arguments, from all the stubborn silences, from all the years we lived as though the other didn't exist. Flight AI-171 wasn't just taking me back to India, it was carrying me back to a part of myself I had forgotten. I sat in seat 11A. Ajay was across the aisle in the middle section. I could see him from where I sat. He wore a cream shirt and still had that old watch I gave him back in college. Neither of us spoke, but for the first time in years, I felt something shift. The distance between us was no longer thousands of miles, it was only a few steps. I told myself I'd walk over in a bit. I'd tell him about my daughter, show him some pictures, ask about his mom, maybe even say, "I'm sorry," with no explanation. But I never got the chance to cross that aisle. I remember it clearly, seat 11A, right by the emergency exit. The seat I once complained about for being uncomfortable turned out to be the very reason I'm here now and not on the list of the dead. The flight took off 15 minutes later than scheduled. No one seemed too upset. There were soft chuckles, a few last-minute calls. I did the same. I texted my daughter a simple message, "I'll be home soon." Who could have known that would be the final proof I ever existed as a father? The plane began taxiing. Engines roared. I glanced to the right, to where my brother Ajay sat 2 rows over. He raised his hand and waved. I nodded, smiled. We didn't speak, but our eyes said everything about how long we'd been apart, how this trip was our chance to heal, how we thought we still had time. But life doesn't wait for anyone. Takeoff. I felt a slight release in my chest, a lightness as if I was finally lifting off from everything that had weighed me down. Sunlight streamed in through the window, pale, golden, peaceful, just for a few seconds. Then, everything shifted. A small explosion, then a high-pitched screech. The cabin pressure dropped instantly. Oxygen masks fell like cold white serpents. Passengers screamed. Children cried. Someone yelled, "Oh God," in Hindi. I turned my head and saw Ajay unbuckling his seatbelt, reaching forward to help someone. I didn't get the chance to call his name. The plane tilted hard to the left. A deafening blast tore through all sound. Then, silence. Not silence in my ears, but the kind that exists when time itself splits in two. I felt my body being pulled downward, like falling into some invisible abyss. And for a moment, I thought that was it. I thought I had died. But no, what I lost wasn't my life. It was the illusion that I had ever been in control of anything at all. It all happened in 59 seconds. Can you believe that? Not even a full minute. From the moment the plane left the ground to the moment it exploded into pieces, taking 241 lives with it. All those dreams, plans, promises, and hopes gone in less time than it takes to play a jingle on the radio. But the most haunting question wasn't what happened. It was, what did I see when time came to a stop?
There was no more explosion, no more screams, no sound at all. Just a vast, endless whiteness. My eyes were open, but I could see nothing. My ears were listening, but I could hear nothing. At first, I thought I had lost consciousness, but I hadn't. I was awake, strangely, terrifyingly awake. I couldn't feel my body. No pain, no weight, no heartbeat, and yet no fear either. Just a total stillness, a space without time, a presence without form. As if I had been peeled away from the shell of my human body, but had somehow kept the purest form of awareness. I saw myself, but from above. My body was sprawled across the wreckage, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle, my face covered in blood. I saw it and didn't feel pain. I knew it was me, but I no longer felt connected to it. That feeling was both foreign and strangely familiar. Like looking into a mirror and seeing your reflection, but feeling no desire to step back into it. Then a circle of light appeared ahead of me, gentle, not blinding, not forceful, just a soft, quiet invitation. It didn't make a sound, but I heard something in my mind. Not words, not even thoughts, but an understanding that needed no translation. It said, "If you are tired, you may let go." And for a moment, I truly wanted to let go. No more noise, no more unfinished things, no more struggle or responsibility. Just the peace of drifting into that invisible brightness. I didn't know where I was, or how long I'd been there. Everything felt frozen, and yet, somehow, flowing. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember who I had been. But I remembered one thing. I had once been human. And that realization hurt more than death itself. I had lived, but had I truly lived? I began drifting slowly toward the light. There were no footsteps, no movement, only intention. As if this place moved according to thought alone. Every question I asked was answered, not in words, but in pure knowing. I wondered, were the others here too? I wondered, could I go back? And then,
I heard the first sound since everything had gone silent. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a call. It was a cry. Soft. So soft. But it rang like thunder inside me. The cry of a child. I turned toward the sound, or rather, toward the sense that someone was there. In that silent, infinite white realm, there were no clear shapes, no physical objects, but something was approaching. Not with footsteps, but with feeling. A small presence, gentle, warm, a young soul, a child. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was a child. I could feel it in the slender frame, in the wide eyes that sparkled like the entire universe was held within their gaze. The child said nothing, gave no sign, didn't ask who I was. It simply stood there and reached out its hand. Small, pale, like a flower that had barely begun to bloom before being torn by the wind. I looked at that hand, and in that moment, my entire life seemed to reflect through the child's eyes. The things I'd forgotten, the words I never said, the apologies stuck in my throat, the hugs I never gave. The dreams I once had as a child are now buried beneath years of duty and striving and becoming someone I thought I needed to be. It all appeared, not to judge me, but to remind me, you've forgotten who you were. I reached out, and as our hands touched, I didn't feel warmth or cold. I felt called back, as if some thread still tethered me to the world I thought I'd left behind. As if the child's eyes were speaking without sound. Live, for we no longer can. Live, not because you still breathe, but because you still have the choice. I looked at the child. I couldn't look away. I couldn't ask who they were. I didn't know where they came from. But one thing struck me, deep, piercing, and undeniable. I'd seen those eyes before. Somewhere else. In another moment. On the ground, in the wreckage. When I first woke up after the crash, there was a small body beside me, eyes open, motionless. I had turned away, unable to bear it. Now I realized it was this very child. And I understood. They didn't come to bring me back. They came to give me back my life. They couldn't continue their path, so they handed me a second chance. Not to go on living the same life, but to live as if I had never truly lived before. I gripped that tiny hand, and everything around me began to shift. The light dimmed. The white space cracked like shattered glass. Something pulled me backward, a force that spun me, dropped me, and returned me. I screamed, not with my mouth, but with every cell of my soul. I wasn't ready. I didn't know where I was going. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was coming back to life, because that child could no longer. I fell. There was no gravity, no direction, and yet I could feel myself falling. From that invisible space, I was pulled back as if a fragment of my soul had been hurled into the old body it once left behind. There was no light, no music, just a dull thud echoing inside my skull, like a door slamming shut. And then came the pain, a violent pain erupting from within, as if every nerve in my body was waking up and screaming in unison, "You're alive." My chest seized. I gasped for air. It was thick, acrid, heavy like lead. I coughed uncontrollably, every breath like inhaling smoke and metal. My entire body felt as if it had been pummeled 100 times over, each impact leaving wounds too deep for the eye to see. As I struggled to sit up, the world around me spun. Scattered across the wreckage were lifeless bodies, frozen like dolls abandoned mid-movement by time itself. Shards of metal jutted from the ground. Small fires still flickered along the torn-open fuselage. The stench of burning flesh, jet fuel, and blood blended into something heavier than memory. I panicked. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what had just happened. All I knew was that if I stood still for one more second, I might never rise again. So I ran, without thinking, without looking back. I ran as if survival was the last instinct my body remembered. I leapt from the plane just as the flames began to spread. I only remember my feet hitting the earth, buckling beneath me, and rolling to the side. But somehow, I got up. My body ached, blood streamed from my temple and leg. Yet I could walk. I walked away from the crash site, not understanding how my body still functioned. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was the promise I hadn't yet fulfilled. The local villagers were the first to reach me. An elderly man rushed over and draped his coat around my shoulders. A young woman helped me into the back of a small truck. They didn't ask who I was. They didn't ask where I came from. They simply saw that I needed saving. Minutes later, I was transferred to an ambulance and taken directly to the civil hospital in Asarwa. By then, I couldn't cry anymore. But one question kept looping in my mind. Did anyone else make it out alive? I woke up again in the hospital. My throat burned. My eyes were swollen shut. My leg was in a cast. A young local nurse leaned down and whispered, "You're the only one who survived." I didn't understand. I stared at her as if she'd just said something absurd, but she repeated it. No one else from that flight made it. And I broke down, not physically, but in spirit. I wept not loudly, but silently. My tears flowed like a quiet stream, cutting through the stone inside me, the stone I didn't even know was there. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow, as if every part of the world I once knew had vanished in those 59 seconds. But within that emptiness, a faint voice began to rise inside me again, a question I had asked before, only now it carried an entirely different weight. Why am I still here? I sat on a stone bench in the hospital courtyard and looked up at the sky. And for the first time, the sky wasn't just the sky. It was a chance, a mirror, an open door. And I began to cry, not the tears of someone lucky to survive, but the tears of a soul returned to itself. I cried like a child, one who had just learned fear, just learned gratitude, realized that being alive is a privilege, not a guarantee. I thought of Ajay. I thought of the 241 souls who never got this moment. I didn't know why they didn't return. I didn't know why I did. But I knew this. From now on, every word I speak, every step I take, every breath I draw must carry meaning. There could be no going back. No more drifting through life, living according to others' expectations, forgetting that every breath is a gift. I returned to my hospital room. On the table were a glass of water, a folded newspaper, and a tiny butterfly that had somehow flown in and landed on my hand. I didn't brush it away. I let it stay so I'd remember that even the fragile can choose to keep going. I looked in the mirror and, for the first time, my eyes weren't lost. They weren't tired. I saw someone who had died, and someone is alive. I'm not who I used to be. That man was buried in the wreckage. Someone new was born in the eyes of a child, in the touch of a cold hand that pulled me from the unseen, in the moment I realized that living isn't about stretching time, but about touching the meaning hidden inside each second. You might be alive, but have you ever died? Have you ever seen yourself from the outside? Have you ever asked, who am I, if everything I know is taken away in a single minute? If not, then live. Live like you have no time. Live like each second is the first time you've opened your eyes. Live like you've just come back from the dead. My name is Vishwash Kumar Ramesh. I was the sole survivor of Flight AI-171. But I am not someone who lives. I am someone who once died. Are you truly living, or are you still waiting for a fall to finally wake you up?